Welcome back to the Student Hub Live STEM Induction and Freshers event. Now, who is doing some practical stuff? Who is going to be using the OpenSTEM Labs? You may not know yet whether you are or not, but some of you may have questions about this. But we're going to get a brief preview of what it's all about with James Smith, who is a senior manager for the Open University STEM Labs, the online platform through which the Open University science and engineering practical activities and experiences are delivered. Now, James oversees the development of these and also the use of the OpenSTEM Labs in OU modules, and these activities and coordinates effects that give STEM students a very authentic experience at a distance. So this is very, very exciting. So James, welcome to the show. Can I start by asking you to give us a little bit of an overview about what the OpenSTEM Labs are?
Sure. Hi, Karen. Well, at the OU, we've always had to come up with even an innovative solution to sort of give our STEM students that sort of authentic, practical experience. Now, in the old days, a lot of students would go to residential schools and they'd get a very sort of compressed practical experience over the course of a weekend or a week. We even used to send out some home experiment kits. So we used to send out instruments and samples in the post. And there are lots of implications now of, why that's not perhaps a very good idea these days. But with the advent of the internet, we started to think about, well, how can we give our students sort of a practical experience over the internet to their screens, to their computer screens? Because a lot of science and engineering is now done sort of via a computer screen. A lot of instruments are controlled sort of via a computer screen. So the OpenSTEM Labs is really the culmination of our efforts over the last 20 years to give students an online, real and authentic practical experience.
One of the things I love about the OpenSTEM Labs, and that I've heard from so many colleagues, is that it isn't a lesser equivalent of something that will be better always to do at a face-to-face university. In some cases, there are equivalents that need to be done online because our students are learning at a distance. But in many, many cases, often what you're offering students is something far superior. We'll talk a little bit later, but for example, access to observatories and things that students at a typical university would never be able to get hold of, operating, a telescope, which is very, very expensive indeed. So what's the sort of structure then of the OpenSTEM Labs? How might this sort of look in terms of how students study? You've got a diagram that sort of shows how it all links together.
Sure. I mean, so the OpenSTEM Labs itself is kind of an umbrella organization around a number of sort of sub labs, really. So if you're a science student, then you would access what we call the Open Science Laboratory. And in there, you would have a range of activities, some of them sort of on-screen interactive types. Some of them are sort of connections to real pieces of equipment. And some of them are working on real pieces of data that have been taken elsewhere and packaged up for you to work on in an authentic manner. If you're an astronomy student, then, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but you over the course of your studies, you will be able to use our telescopes in Tenerife remotely from your own home, via your laptop or your tablet. Engineering students, we have something called an Open Engineering Laboratory. And in there currently, again, you will get a real connection to some real pieces of engineering equipment. And we also still retain an ability to sort of bring people to a place, which is quite difficult at the moment. And there are various solutions going on to that. So we still bring people together for residential experiences or face-to-face activity where there's a particular need. So that may be in sort of chemistry, where people are coming to learn chemistry techniques which are still best done in the lab, or in, for example, geology, where field trips are still a very important part of the learning process.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. Now, some students, students will be pointed at these, won't they? So students who need to access certain things, it'll be very clear about where and when they go, because their modules are all structured in a really nice way so that their study calendar will tell them, for example, what they need to do and when. But when they do need to access the OpenSTEM Labs, what does it look like, and how do students actually go and access it?
So typically, that there will be a link in your module materials, which will take you to a particular experiment. What we're seeing at the moment, or what we can see, is a picture of our front page. but links from module activities tend to bypass that and go direct to the experiment that you are being asked to carry out at that particular time. So it's all sort of seamless, really. There's a seamless experience, for experiments that you can just do then and there, so to speak. You will be able to launch the experiment and do that. If it's a remote piece of kit that you need to use, then you may need to book a slot. But we have a seamless booking system, so you will book a slot on a piece of kit, and then you will come back to that page sort of one day later or a week later to carry out your session.
That's absolutely brilliant, because there are on campus real things that people can access virtually. So you get a time slot when you can actually operate that device virtually. It's super exciting. Vic, are people at home looking forward to this? Have we heard from students who've maybe used the OpenSTEM Labs?
Both of those things, yeah. So we've got Beverly says she loves the Open Labs, which is brilliant news. We have some people that are excited about the potential of using the Mars facility, which is really good news. And we have a question, maybe this is for James, from Nigel, which is the one thing he wonders about is what might be missing is the messy business of setting up the equipment to do the experiment. Can you say something about how that works from your end?
Yeah, so essentially we take care of that, but there's in some areas there is a need to prepare samples or calibrate equipment, and that's an area that is something we're looking at quite closely, how we can sort of, if you like, extend the actual use of a kit out to sort of knowing and understanding a bit more about the piece of equipment they're using or the technique that you're using. But typically where we can't give that experience, in your module materials, you will find sort of guidance on what would be done. So you may see a sort of a video which tells you how to prepare a sample, and you may still get questioned on that in your assignments. So it's still things that you need to know. But we're looking more closely at how we can sort of try and bring a bit more along in sort of the pre-lab area of sample prep and understanding more about equipment.
Brilliant. Eliza says she really likes the experiments. She had to blow a fuse once, which she said was very fun. So tell us then, James, about what sorts of experiments there are in the OpenSTEM Labs. What sorts of things are lined up for students?
So one particular set that we have, as we spoke about, is our remote experiments, and these are where a student or a group of students will book a slot to use a particular piece of equipment, and that may well be a scanning electron microscope. So we have electron microscopes on our campus in Walton Hall that students will be able to log into pretty much 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and control. So what we see here on the screen here is a shot of our remote electron microscope interface, and I'm not a biologist, but that looks suspiciously like a fruit fly eye to me there. So in the top left of that image, you can see the sample tray. So you can see we can put many samples in this electron microscope, and then you can sort of move around and select which sample you need to look at. But again, in your module materials, you will be told which sample that you need to analyze. And there's a bit more of a close-up view there of the eye. On campus, we have a variety of other remote experiments. We have a radio dish which we can perform radio astronomy with. So students will, in this case, log on to it in sort of groups of 3 or 4, and they talk together while they're using it. They move the dish, they take their measurements, and then they go away and they analyze them together in a group. So that's a really good group work activity. And there's a whole range of other experiments that we have that not necessarily remote experiments, but more of what we call on-screen interactives. So typically you would do them on your own. You would sort of have an interface where you would need to perform measurements. So what we're looking at now is a skull measurement activity. So comparing different types of skulls and their sort of evolutionary history, and this particular one is used at level 1 in the level 1 science modules. So there's a whole range of experiments that we need to use, and it gives that breadth of practical experience across a whole range of STEM subjects.
Oh, James says he had a whole beaker of stuff spilt down him at school, so he's very grateful that we're going to be doing this all online. So can we take a little video as well to show people a little bit about these experiences, James?
Sure. Yeah, so we mentioned our telescopes in Tenerife, and here they are. And those of you who have been to Tenerife will maybe recognise Mount Heidi. So our telescopes are at an observatory just off the side of that. And these are used every night, really, for student use in modules. They're used for research. We have people looking at time variable stars and also near Earth asteroids as well. And we also use these telescopes in an outreach capacity. So for those of you who are interested, at the moment we have available via the OpenLearn platform what we call a badged open course, where you can gain a chance to use the telescopes yourself. We're just looking here. Again, another usage of the electron microscope this is an engineering experiment, pendulums, where students learn about sort of control. So students are actually making that pendulum dangle and taking those measurements from wherever they are. And here's an example of our on-screen, what we call on-screen experiments. So this particular experiment is to do with the use of a spirometer, which is a typical sort of medical instrument that may be used. And here we're teaching students about sort of what results that can produce.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. Vic, I hear there's some interest in the badged open course.
That's actually the one that James has just mentioned. There's a few people now quite keen to do it. Stephanie says she is so doing it now, so that's good news. Well advertised there, James. Just to pick up on one thing from Nigel has suggested that his brother-in-law, who's an OU science graduate, actually uses telescopes remotely for his research. So it's not really far off, James, is it? Reality, the telescopes that are in OpenSTEM and what researchers actually use.
Absolutely. I mean, I myself. I'm an astronomer sort of by training, and sort of when I was doing my PhD in early stages of research, we used to go to the telescopes and use them. Now, the positive of that is that telescopes are usually in exotic places like Hawaii and the Canary Islands. Nowadays, pretty much everything can be done remotely. So professional astronomers use a lot of the telescopes remotely in a way that's very, very similar to how our OU students we use our telescopes. So in that particular subject area, we really are giving you that sort of professional experience that you might undertake yourself if you went on to study further or partake in research.
And in other news, James, there's some confusion over phrenology and craniology, although everyone says it is just skulls at the end of the day. Can you clarify any of that?
As I said, I'm an astronomer by training, so I think that's kind of that's outside of my sort of particular skill set.
No, that's absolutely fine. There's so many different areas of interest at the Open University. I'm sure somebody somewhere deep in a cupboard in K Block knows something about that. Excellent. So people are saying they're up for it. Some people are even wanting to leave this show to get on with things. What sorts of things can students who may not have these activities embedded in their module materials do? So people who are just interested, outside the formal curriculum, what can they do to have a bit of fun with the OpenSTEM Labs?
Sure. So our main website is www.opensciencelab.ac.uk, and there's a link to that on the Student Hub Live page, as there is a link to the badged open course for astronomy. And if you go to that link, you will be presented with our front page, and there's a lot of sort of open access experiments on that page that you can undertake yourself now. Things like the skull experiment is there. We have things like virtual microscopes. There are a whole range of things covering different areas. We have a showcase page, which we've particularly developed given the current COVID situation. So if you were to search for showcase, you would come across that, and that gives you also gives you some access to some of the other remote experiments, particularly the engineering ones there. So there's a whole range of open access things that you might like to try now, or in between modules, or when you have a little bit of time.
Wonderful. And just to end on, James, ever so briefly, what is the future for the OpenSTEM Labs?
So we're expanding all the time. We're looking at new areas of the curriculum where we might apply some of the methods that we've used already. One particular thing that we're developing at the moment is a wind tunnel facility that will be available for engineering students in the future. So there's a picture there of the sort of wind tunnel that students will be able to log into and use and sort of obtain and then take away and analyze their own results from a real wind tunnel. So not a simulation; it's a real experiment that you'll be undertaking. And we've also recently produced what we call a Raspberry Pi cluster. So with colleagues in the School of Computing, we've developed a means for students to access a cluster of Raspberry Pis where students can sort of learn about, cluster computing and how that differs from just using a single processor, for example.
Wonderful. Speaking of pies, I think it's time for a break, James. Thank you so much for filling us in. Katrina Bray, one of our colleagues, has put in the link for the OpenSTEM Labs in the chat and is also there answering your questions as well. Thanks, Katrina, for helping Vic out. Vic's been ever so busy. Vic, time for a cuppa. We're going to have a break now and look at Amy's piece, episode number 1, how the OU helped me get my placement, and the International Open Diaries on technology enhanced learning. And then we're coming back to talk about being a STEM student from a personal perspective. So join me in just a couple of minutes.